What's up, guys? Welcome into the Up and Under podcast, the show dedicated to the true basketball fans, giving you unfiltered, intellectual takes on the game we all love. If you like what you hear, consider subscribing to the show here on YouTube or wherever you can find a podcast. I'm your host, Hani, joining me as always, it's Zeeshan.
Yo.
All right, man. Now that we've kind of passed the major, news of free agency, some of the major headlines have kind of already surpassed. We're now getting into sort of the dry period where, reporters and news outlets are kind of looking for anything to really talk about. And what's better than trade speculation?
Yep.
And, at least this year in particular, we have no shortage of trade speculations because it's the NBA and it's a living drama.
And, a contract means nothing anymore, basically.
What are those?
Yeah.
I don't know what those are anymore. But, yeah, basically, over the last few weeks, there's been a few players that have been circulating around the trade rumors. And there seems more and more likely of a possibility that these players will actually be dealt. Either it's going to be now, either it's going to be late in August, hell, even by the trade deadline, or maybe even before next season. But we wanted to kind of talk about some of those players, kind of talk about some of the rumored trade packages that are being floated around out there. And those players are Damian Lillard, who already asked out of a trade from the Portland Trail Blazers, Pascal Siakam, who hasn't asked for a trade, but there has been some growing frustrations and some growing, friction between him and the front office, and James Harden, who, is pissed at Daryl Morey and basically opted in order to get traded.
Yep.
So we're going to be breaking down these three players and the trade situations that they are currently in. So starting us off with Damian Lillard. Now, Damian Lillard, after all these years, has finally asked out of Portland. I think it was pretty clear after the Portland Trail Blazers couldn't find a trade for the number 3 overall pick that Damian Lillard is just going to be on his way out of Portland. The problem with that is that Damian Lillard has only named the Miami Heat as his preferred trade destination, which complicates the matters when it comes to the Portland Trail Blazers because, technically speaking, they don't have to comply, and it puts pressure on the Miami Heat to put up an offer that Portland would actually be willing to accept. And Damian Lillard does not have a no-trade clause, so it's not like if the Trailblazers have to trade him to the Miami Heat. It's not like a Bradley Beal situation. Damian Lillard can be traded literally anywhere. It could be even freaking Utah for all we know. But the reality is that in today's NBA, usually when the star kind of dictates where they want to go. It's just kind of how it operates. But Damian Lillard, he doesn't have a no-trade clause on his contract. He has 3 years left on his deal with a player option worth $63 million in 2026.
That's crazy.
That is insane that his option is $63 million. Like, imagine going up and be like, hey, you have an option to turn down $63 million.
NBA money, man.
It's absolutely insane. Sorry, NHL players. Y'all are missing out big time.
Blame Gary Bettman.
Yeah, absolutely. But so that's the first part of it. Damian Lillard's contract is absolutely massive, but he can be traded anywhere. The second thing is that the Miami Heat, they don't really have a ton of assets that the Portland Trail Blazers would actually want. And I'll get into that with some of the rumored trades. But, again, in order for the Heat, who do really want Damian Lillard, they kind of made that clear after they lost in the finals. They need a third star.
They cleared out a bunch of cap space in free agency just because of that.
Yeah, so they clearly are gearing towards a potential move, but they don't really have the assets that would entice Portland to pull the trigger. So, and the Blazers, you can't really blame them if they're trading their franchise superstar. They want young players, draft picks, potentially expiring deals, or hell, even a young superstar. And currently the Miami Heat have some of those, but they're not necessarily the greatest of those, especially for a caliber of player that Damian Lillard is. And ultimately, I think you'll find after we break down some of these trades is that the only way that a legitimate Damian Lillard trade can actually happen is via a 3-team or a multi-team trade. It's very hard to see a 1-to-1 team trade for a player with this type of contract and this type of situation. But speaking of those rumored trade packages, let's jump into, some of those trades and kind of what we think about them. So the first trade package is obviously for the Miami Heat. Now, this trade would involve the Heat will be acquiring Damian Lillard and Jusuf Nurkic. You can kind of do this trade without Jusuf Nurkic as well, but Jusuf Nurkic's name was in there, so we're going to keep him in there. But essentially, the Heat would get Lillard and Nurkic. The Blazers would get Tyler Hero, Kyle Lowry, Jaime Jaquez, who was the Miami Heat's draft pick in the first round this year. 3 first-round picks in 2027, 2028, and 2029, plus a first-round pick swap in 2026. Now, for the Miami Heat, I understand why this makes a ton of sense. You're getting that third star. You're not giving up Jimmy Butler. You're not giving up Bam Adebayo. You still kept a guy like his name's slipping me, but he played Martin. You still Caleb Martin. You're still keeping him on the roster. And obviously you can fill up the bench however way you want. But essentially now you have Damian Lillard, Jimmy Butler, and Bam Adebayo together. That would be a pretty lethal combination. But I think from the Blazers side of things, I think this trade, it's okay. I think it doesn't really help them out right now. Like Tyler Hero, he's an okay player. Like he had a good year last year, but I'm still on the fence on whether or not Tyler Hero can maintain any level of consistency. Kyle Lowry is a pure rental, and the draft picks are nothing special. So
I mean, Tyler Hero is essentially the main piece. He would be the main piece in this trade. But the thing you have to remember is you already have Anthony Simons.
Exactly.
Who kind of plays the exact same role that Tyler Hero plays for the Miami Heat. So in that case, what are you actually getting out of this trade if you're the Portland Trailblazers? The answer is not much, which is why we said any team that wants to do this is going to have to involve a third, potentially even, a fourth team.
Yeah, unless one other team gets involved, and I'll talk about them in a little bit. But in terms of the Miami Heat, it's very tough to see them making a move like this. I would even say you can maybe throw in Duncan Robinson into this deal. But again, why would Portland want Duncan Robinson? It's one of those situations. Because I think Miami's more attractive younger pieces left in free agency. We're talking about Gabe Vincent, Max Strus. Those, I think, players were a lot more enticing. And I think, again, do you want to include Hayward Highsmith? I think he just re-upped anyways with the Miami Heat. So you can't even trade him anyways in this, right now. So, yeah, it's difficult to see a trade with the Miami Heat kind of going down, at least now a one-to-one deal. Which brings me into the next team that reportedly has shown some interest, mainly because of Damian Lillard's connection with a player on that team, and that's the Brooklyn Nets. Now, Damian Lillard is very close with Mikal Bridges, apparently. They've been boys for a little bit, so there is some relationship there. And obviously, because Brooklyn completely failed their experiment with KD, Kyrie, and Harden, they kind of need a win at some point.
Well, I mean, with Brooklyn, the thing is they kind of hit the reset button, and they hit a pretty good reset button with the team that they have now. They have assets. They have the young players. So it's you can see why it would be enticing to a team like Portland who kind of seeks those kind of assets.
But then again, you get in the situation of how much would Brooklyn be willing to give up? Because Damian Lillard wants to get out of Portland to go into a winning situation where he can win a championship. And for the Nets, it doesn't seem like they're willing to part ways with some of their main assets. So in this proposed trade, the Nets would get Damian Lillard, the Blazers would get Ben Simmons, Dorian Finney-Smith, Cam Thomas, and multiple first-round picks. Now, again, for the Brooklyn Nets, I think this is a huge win. Getting a guard like Damian Lillard to come in next to Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, Nick Claxton, all the young talent that they have on that team already. You get out under Ben Simmons' atrocious contract. And you're not really giving up much. Dorian Finney-Smith and Cam Thomas are nice players, but they're nothing really special. It's not like Brooklyn doesn't have replacements for them. So I think for Brooklyn it makes all the sense in the world. But for the Blazers, first off, I think Ben Simmons and Scoot Henderson would not work on the court just because Scoot Henderson isn't a floor spacer. Ben Simmons is not a spacer of any kind. So that wouldn't necessarily work on that side of the floor. And then again, if you're excluding Simmons, who we don't even know if it's really going to play, really. I don't even know if he's going to play.
I mean, who knows? Well, apparently he's playing for Australia, or he said he wants to. I don't know if Australia wants him, but
yeah, I don't think so. But either way, we don't know if you're removing Ben Simmons from the equation. Now, if you're talking about trade with Dorian Finney-Smith and Cam Thomas as your main pieces back, it doesn't necessarily move the needle if I'm Portland.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's all of these deals would be very tough to stomach if you're Portland, and rightfully so. I mean, you're giving up the greatest player in franchise history. So any return that you get is most likely going to be underwhelming compared to the fact that you're trading away Damian Lillard.
Yeah. So I mean, Brooklyn's interesting, but it's tough to see them making a move work. But a team that I think is interesting, and this is probably would be the idealist scenario if I'm the Portland Trailblazers, but would be a deal with the Boston Celtics. Now, the Celtics obviously had a disappointing end to their season, losing in the conference finals to the Miami Heat. But I think for them, Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, I think, overlap too much in their skill sets for them to be I guess, a great duo. So I think getting rid of one of them, especially now that their extensions are coming up and maybe Boston might not be willing to pay those, maybe moving on from one of them makes a ton of sense. So in this trade, the Celtics get Damian Lillard, the Trailblazers get Jaylen Brown, Derek White, and multiple first round picks. And I think this is probably the most balanced trade where everyone kind of gets what they want. The Celtics get Damian Lillard to pair with Jason Tatum and now Kristaps Porzingis on that team. You still keep Malcolm Brogdon. You still got Horford. You still got Time Lord. It's still a very good team. But now you're adding Damian Lillard, who probably fits better next to Jason Tatum. And then the Blazers, they get Jaylen Brown, a superstar level player who they can sign long term, pair him with Scoot Henderson, with Anthony Simons and Shaedon Sharpe. That seems like a pretty good place for both sides. Now the question is that will the Celtics want to deal Jaylen Brown because he is extension eligible? He is younger than Damian Lillard. He is healthier than Damian Lillard. So would they want to make a move like that? But I think this is probably the most interesting move.
I mean, we talked about it in a couple episodes back as well that this was probably the most one-to-one fair trade you could get for both parties involved. I mean, for Portland, you get what you want. You get the young star that you want. You get a Derek White who can be used as a trade chip, or you can keep him. He's a good veteran, good player. And for the Celtics, if you're serious about trying to win right now, I think this is the time to go for it because you mentioned Jaylen Brown being extension eligible. Jason Tatum is going to be extension eligible from next year. You already have Kristaps Porzingis on his extension for technically 3 more years as of right now. And then who knows what kind of cap situation occurs after that because you still have Al Horford who is, he's on his last legs at this point. We saw that in the playoffs. He can still provide some value, but it's not going to be there for that much longer. You have Time Lord who, unfortunately with his injury issues, you kind of don't know if you're going to be able to maximize his potential moving forward for how long we'll see. And, Malcolm Brogdon right now, another guy who's injury prone. But you have this collection of talent that you have right now. I think you have to kind of go for it if you're the Boston Celtics. Now, does this mean you automatically will get a championship with Damian Lillard and Jason Tatum and Kristaps Porzingis? No. But the point is you have to at least, I think, attempt to go for it.
Yeah, exactly. I think at some point when you keep doing the same thing over and over again, it's just a definition of insanity. So trying something new might help them out. But speaking of a team that keeps trying to do the same thing over and over again is the Toronto Raptors. Now, the Raptors have obviously been, kind of on a decline for the last few seasons since the championship, unfortunately. But, especially now that Fred VanVleet has left, they do have a massive hole at point guard. And Masai Ujiri, and I know Zeeshan will talk about the flip side of what I'm going to talk about, but Masai Ujiri is the type of person that wants to win in Toronto. He wants to win now and as soon as possible. And I think especially if the Raptors still unsure if they're going to extend Pascal and OG, hey, might as well go for another Kawhi level swing and go after a guy like Damian Lillard to pair with those two guys and potentially make another run. So the Raptors would get Damian Lillard in this trade, and the Portland Trailblazers would be getting Scotty Barnes to get back Gary Trent Jr., Thaddeus Young, Malachi Flynn, multiple first-round picks. Now, for the Blazers, I think for them, this trade makes a little bit of sense as well. They get a young player in Scotty Barnes to pair with Scoot Henderson. They're both on the same timelines. They both can grow together. They're both young, exciting. They're good players to have and to build with. And they also get multiple first-round picks. Gary Trent Jr. is a solid floor spacer. They know the player. They can keep him or flip him. He's a pretty movable guy. Then the other two guys, Thaddeus Young is a pure rental. Malachi Flynn, he can either develop into something or maybe not. But I think for the Blazers, it's not a terrible return. Now for the Raptors, I'm kind of in the middle with this one. I think, yes, pairing Damian Lillard, Pascal Siakam, OG Anunoby, and Jakob Poeltl seems pretty interesting on paper. Especially now that you have guys like Grady Dick off the bench. You have some of the other players that they'd be keeping. Like Otto Porter, Dennis Schroeder would still be there. It'd be an interesting mix. But it is really cutting into their depth, losing scoring from Gary Trent Jr. and giving up on a young player like Scotty Barnes is a risk. It's definitely risky, considering the fact that we kind of did this with Jakob Poeltl in the DeMar DeRozan trade. Now, that one clearly worked out. We won the championship because of it. But looking back, I mean, had we had Jakob Poeltl, after Mark and Serge left, that would have helped us so much rather than looking for a center for all those years. But you can never know with these things. But I think for the Raptors, I think they need to really look at this move and say, okay, if we make this move, will this get us a championship? And I think I would still lean towards no.
Well, I mean, if I'm the Portland Trailblazers, I would love this deal. But as a Raptors fan, I would hate this deal just because of the fact that you're trading away a guy like Scotty Barnes, who, granted, we don't know how good he's going to be, but he already is as good as he is right now as a young player, as a second, third-year guy. You're trading him away for a guy in Damian Lillard. Now, granted, I think Damian Lillard's great, but I've always had my criticisms of him, especially in the playoffs. People, I think, get fooled by his buzzer beaters and his big shots, which, granted, he's had a lot of big shots. But being a good performer in the playoffs is not just about hitting those clutch shots. If you take away those clutch shots, if you look at Damian Lillard as a whole in his playoff career, it hasn't been the greatest story. And granted, some of that is because of the lack of talent he's had, but also some of that shows his limitations as a player. And for me, getting that back as a fan of the Toronto Raptors, pairing that with Pascal Siakam, I don't think that's going to make you impressively better. Yeah, you're going to be a playoff team for sure. But who wants to stick in that first, second round tier? I mean, the Raptors already showed that they could do it with the collection of talent they had. They just need to maximize it a bit. They got to the first round 2 years ago. Getting Damian Lillard, giving up on your young talent, giving up on your future just to get to one round more, I don't think is worth it from the Toronto Raptors perspective.
Yeah, I think they have to weigh it. And I think when you're comparing it to the Kawhi trade, if I'm just going back to that, Kawhi was a much better player. Kawhi was a two-way monster. We saw him in the playoffs. This guy put up Jordan-esque performances in the playoffs for the Raptors to win. And we still, in all honesty, we barely did it, but we pulled it off somehow. We needed that buzzer beater. We needed, Kawhi to step up in the finals and the conference finals.
And not to mention, the Eastern Conference is much better now than it was
exactly.
in 2019. So I don't know. I would not do this trade if I'm the Toronto Raptors. But yeah, from the Portland Trailblazers perspective, I think it's great.
Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, those were 4 potential trades. Like I mentioned earlier, it just looks more likely this trade is going to take some time. Portland's GM has already kind of made it clear that, hey, I'm willing to wait it out. I'm going to weigh in all the options, and I'm going to try to get the best deal, as he probably should. And I think in order for this trade to really happen, I think it needs multiple teams. In order for every team to get some fair value out of this.
Well, I mean, bro, Damian Lillard has a bunch of time left on his contract. Like, if I'm the Portland Trailblazers, like, honestly, like, screw him, man. Like, he signed a massive contract. I get you're not happy with your situation in Portland. They didn't, put the best team around you. But at the end of the day, like, a contract's got to mean something at some point. We've seen this too many times with the NBA players. And listen, I'm a fan of player movement. I respect it, but there's a limitation to what we've seen. I think a lot of fans are also frustrated with the kind of too much player empowerment that we've seen in the NBA.
Like, I think it's like when the scales are kind of tipped way to one side, it just makes it like it doesn't make it more of a choice, more of like an even partnership between the organization and the player. It just seems more like, hey, we want this, you have to do it. And the organization is like, why? It just creates too much tension. But yeah, I think a 3-team deal is probably what's going to sell it. And I think it's going to be interesting because the team that I think is the best wildcard team to jump into a 3-team deal would be Toronto, actually, depending on what they want to do with a player like Pascal Siakam.
Yeah, sticking with Pascal Siakam, he's the next guy we're going to talk about. Now, he's on the last year of his deal, and he's wanted an extension. Unfortunately, he was not Supermax eligible because of the fact that he didn't make the All-NBA team this year, which, I mean, listen, I love Pascal Siakam, but as a Raptors fan, I'm kind of happy he didn't
the Supermax sucks. We've seen it now a lot, and it sucks for anybody who's a fan of a team that's offered a Supermax to a player. I mean, how didn't Damian Lillard get a Supermax?
Yep.
Yeah, so there you go. It really just handcuffs your team.
And so obviously the Raptors and Pascal Siakam have not been on the same page when it comes to extension talks. Pascal obviously wants the max money he can get, and Toronto, from what I've seen, is the limit that they're willing to give Pascal is around a 3-year deal, in the, let's say, $120 million-ish range from what I've seen. right? Which would be a good deal for both sides, but a shorter term deal for the Toronto Raptors. The reason why being that Toronto is officially in retool mode, they're officially in a transition phase. Fred VanVleet just left. They, traded away their old guard. Pascal Siakam may be next, on the trading block. And so they want to retool, pivot to more of the young players, Scotty Barnes, Gary Trent Jr., potentially OG Anunoby, we'll see. Grady Dick now that they drafted. And just a new, kind of a new environment overall.
With a new coach, new system, completely new coaching staff. So yeah, it's a lot of new, and the Raptors are really trying to go into a different culture or a different era, as Masai Ujiri has kind of described it as.
And again, so they can keep Pascal Siakam. I don't think there's an issue with it, but they do have to field those offers for him, see what they can get right now. And Hani already talked about the Portland deal, so I'm not gonna go into the Portland Trailblazers that much. But the two main teams I think that have been discussed in Pascal Siakam trade rumors have been the Atlanta Hawks and Indiana Pacers. Recently, there's been more chatter about the New York Knicks, who will also be discussed with the next player, James Harden. But in terms of Atlanta, the talks were more open before, I think. But now with DeJounte Murray's extension, I think that hampers the trade talks a little bit. He just signed his extension recently. So obviously he can't be traded right away, and then now he has that price tag with him. He's no longer an expiring contract. But one of the trade proposals that has been pushed forward is Pascal Siakam for DeAndre Hunter, Bogdan Bogdanovic, AJ Griffin, and 2 first-round picks. Conversely, another package that has been discussed is essentially almost kind of the same thing, with DeAndre Hunter being the main piece. Obviously, he has around, I think, $20 million per year on his deal. Yeah. Onyeka Okongwu, Kobe Buffkin, who they just drafted, in a combination of picks. I think neither of these packages are that bad if you're a Toronto fan. DeAndre Hunter is a good young player. He can improve. I don't think he's going to be anything like an all-star, but he's a nice young player to have. Kobe Buffkin, we'll see how good he is. AJ Griffin was pretty good in his first year, but I don't think anybody's projecting him to be some all-star level player. Okongwu is, a pretty good, nice young big man as well. Bogdan Bogdanovic is kind of what he is. So you're not getting too bad of quality coming back to Toronto. But the problem is, how do you justify getting rid of a top 25 player like Pascal Siakam for a package that is okay at best?
See, I think this is where people really get frustrated with the Raptors, because they feel that the Raptors are overvaluing their players, which to a degree I can see why people think that. But at the same time, when you take a step back and you realize Pascal Siakam, he is a multiple-time All-Star, an NBA champion. He is a very hard worker, a very good team guy. Two-way
player.
He's now been a multiple-time All-NBA guy. Like, this is one of the best players in the league. And if the Raptors are trading away their best player, of course they're going to want a comparable return, something that's going to make, making that trade worth it. Because let's be honest with you, the Raptors still have Pascal for another year. Now, yes, for the Raptors, asset management is important, but they don't really have to trade him. They need to be absolutely wowed in order to do this trade now, which, at least for the Hawks, at least now that DeJounte Murray's off the table, which, to be honest with you, the Raptors kind of need a point guard. They absolutely need a point guard.
Well, that's what I was saying. I think pre-DeJounte Murray extension, this would have been a very viable trade option. But post-DeJounte Murray extension, I don't think this is much of a package anymore.
Yeah, and so these are nice. It's not bad. It's not a bad package, but is it worth an All-NBA, All-Star level player? And I'd say no. I just don't. Like, again, and I just see too much repetition in what the Raptors already have on the roster. Like, you have to also think, if we're trading Pascal, we want players that'll fit with Scotty Barnes better and OG Anunoby, not replications of those same type of players.
Yeah, the next team is the Indiana Pacers, who have been in the rumor mill, for Pascal Siakam. Now, the Indiana Pacers would have to have some sort of combination of at least Buddy Hield, because he would be the only guy that could somehow make salaries match. Daniel Tice, Andrew Nembhard, who I think he's named in this just because he's Canadian, Aaron Nesmith, and a combination of picks. Now, if the Atlanta Hawks trade package was average at best, this is a pretty bad trade package. You're
Yeah,
really not getting anything of value here. Buddy Hield is good for a let's say a contender.
it's
He's
a
not
pure
really
rental.
worth anything for the Toronto Raptors. The only thing I think the only player people would be excited about in this deal is Andrew Nembhard, and that's just because of the fact that he's Canadian. There's nothing really worth it in this deal.
Yeah.
And like I said, with the Damian Lillard situation, same thing with Pascal Siakam. If there was a trade, it would have to involve a third team because I don't think any team can do a 1-to-1 deal that would be necessarily worth it. Maybe the next team we're going to talk about, but most likely not.
I think with the Pacers, if I'm even the Raptors, man, the conversation has to start with Benedict Mathurin. If it doesn't, then I'm ending the call. Just because, again, what are you giving me for my superstar level player? Sure, it'll make the Pacers if they get Siakam, him, Halliburton. It's gonna be a good team. It's gonna be a really fun team. But hey, the Raptors need something back, and Andrew Nembhard being the major piece that the Raptors would get back is not moving the needle for me. I'd want Mathurin personally.
Yeah, and finally, I think the most interesting team in these rumors is the New York Knicks. In a proposed trade, the Knicks would get Pascal Siakam, Chris Boucher, and Thad Young, whereas the Raptors would get Julius Randle, R.J. Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley, and two first-round picks. Now, I think with this deal, this is probably the best deal for both sides and amongst the deals that we've mentioned so far. The Knicks definitely get upgrade over Julius Randle. The Knicks are, they're in win now mode. They want to win as many playoff games as they can. So replacing a guy like Julius Randle, who has historically underperformed in all the big moments in the playoffs and regular season, replacing him with Pascal Siakam, who is a bona fide, at least top 25 player in the league and who's proven himself in big moments in the playoffs, I think adds a level of depth, adds a level of stardom that the New York Knicks desperately need, especially in the market that is New York. I think for the Toronto Raptors, you get back a good player in Julius Randle. Now, granted, we have our criticisms of him, but at the very least, he's an all-star level player.
And he's movable. Like you can move Julius Randle potentially somewhere else down the line. But I think if you're looking at this deal, the other two pieces, I think, and the picks are a lot more enticing for the Raptors.
Yeah, Emmanuel Quickley, R.J. Barrett. R.J. Barrett obviously being Canadian, being the main piece in this deal. He's had some struggles throughout his career. I still have hope for him that he can, improve in the right situation. But, I mean, that's what the Toronto Raptors are in, they're in that mode right now. Emmanuel Quickley as well has proven himself to be a very good player thus far. I don't think he's going to be an all-star level player, but he has been very good for the New York Knicks. So getting a combination of young players like R.J. Barrett and Emmanuel Quickley plus picks, I think would be great for the Toronto Raptors. Not to mention, I mean, Julius Randle, for all our criticisms of him, he'll keep the team exciting at the very least.
Yeah, and I think he can spread the floor for a guy like Scotty Barnes as well. So I think it's not necessarily a terrible fit because Julius Randle can shoot better than Pascal Siakam. So there's that for you. But I think for me, the more important thing is the Knicks have 4 first-rounders in 2024. If I'm the Raptors, if I get 2 of those picks, especially one of them is a Pistons pick, if I get 2 of those picks, I mean, hey, that's a great way to restock the cupboards, get more young talent, kind of, jumpstart the retool and the rebuild a little bit more. So by getting more young, talented players into the system. So yeah, the New York Knicks definitely an interesting one for sure. Bringing us finally into our last player that we wanted to talk about, and this is probably the player that's probably the most interesting. I guess not the most interesting, the most difficult in order to move. It's James Harden. Now James Harden, obviously he opted in, shocking everybody. He opted into a $35.6 million player option. And basically, he told Daryl Morey, hey, trade me, bro. Because he looked at the landscape and realized that it's going to be very difficult for a team to sign him to the contract that he wanted, especially after Houston decided to go to the Fred VanVleet direction. So, he said what's an easier way to get to anywhere he wants is via trade.
Not to mention the fact that he reportedly gave up, they had extension talks before, and he gave up money last year in Philadelphia, expecting to be repaid that money moving forward. And now they're saying, hey, we don't think we want to give you that money. So naturally he was like, all right, well, if I did that for you guys don't want to repay me like that, screw off, basically.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it's a typical James Harden thing to do. Now, reportedly, he wants to go to the Clippers now because he's obviously a California native. He wants to go back and play, but obviously that's going to be very difficult. In terms of a potential trade, you can possibly make it work 1-to-1 if you trade Harden for Norman Powell, Marcus Morris, Amir Coffey, maybe a second rounder. But if I'm the Philadelphia 76ers, I would not want to take that deal, which means you would have to potentially involve a third team. Now, a couple of options that you could potentially go with is maybe the Dallas Mavericks. If they're willing to maybe kind of go with a deal that looks like this, Clippers would get James Harden, JaVale McGee, and Furkan Korkmaz. The Sixers would get Norman Powell, Tim Hardaway Jr., Terrence Mann, 2 second-round picks, and 2 first-rounders. And the Mavs get Robert Covington and Ivica Zubac. Now,
Shout out that we found that trade online on Trade NBA. So shout out to the guy that made it, Craig. I don't know what his name is, but I mean that's the guy that made the trade. So we're not claiming credit.
Yeah, we're not claiming credit for that trade,
but I mean it's definitely. I think that was one of the better trades I'd seen for all the parties.
yeah, like it's an interesting trade. I think the Mavs getting Zubac, who they needed a center, getting Robert Covington, two-way guy. For the Sixers, I mean you're getting some decent depth back, and some draft capital, and the Clippers would obviously get James Harden in that deal. I don't necessarily think it makes any of these teams better, if I'm being perfectly honest with you, because the Clippers lose out on their depth. They're getting another flaky superstar to pair with their other 2 superstars that barely play in general. So, yeah, and for the Mavs, I mean...
You get your big man if you're the Mavs.
Yeah, you get the big man. The Mavs get a slight upgrade, I think. But, yeah, this one doesn't necessarily move the needle for me in general. But you can kind of see what we mean, where you need a third team in order to make the trade remotely fair. The next team that might have some interest in James Harden would be the New York Knicks. Now, a trade that we found would potentially be James Harden going to the Knicks, RJ Barrett and Isaiah Hartenstein, along with a 2024 first-rounder heading to the Sixers. Again, this is a trade that probably would need a third team in order to make the Sixers, in order to entice them to make this move. But, realistically, the Knicks could also throw in another first-rounder because they do have multiple in 2024. But, yeah, for the Sixers, they'd be taking a flyer on RJ Barrett, definitely taking a step back in their team, which they probably shouldn't be doing, especially considering they need to maximize the prime years of Joel Embiid and at least try to compete for one championship. So, although it would be interesting to see James Harden in New York with Jalen Brunson and Julius Randle, I don't see why the Sixers would make this type of move, because they want to get a move that they can win a championship with.
Yeah, man. Like we talked about with Pascal Siakam and Damian Lillard, there has to probably be a third team involved, because 1-to-1 deals between 2 teams are just not going to cut it for the caliber of players that are getting traded, and as well the contract situations of said players. It just would not work. I don't see it working. And I mean, the interesting thing about all of these trade rumors with these 3 guys is there's not really a clear-cut solution to, trading these guys. So I think that's what makes this particular set of players interesting. But yeah, we'll see what happens, I guess.
Yeah, we'll definitely see what happens with these 3 players. Obviously, they don't have to be traded. I think we're getting all confused with the whole player empowerment thing. These guys don't have to get moved. They're all contracted for next season. So we'll see what happens. This might be a long one, a long battle between these 2 sides. Sure. But we'll see what happens. Moving on into the up and under segment for this week. First and foremost, are you up or under on the NBA changing a rule to allow for coaches, allowing for 2 coaches challenges during a game? Now, I believe the official ruling would be, if you're successful on your first coach's challenge, you get a secondary one, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, but they still, I think they still take away the timeout, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
But yeah, either way, man, I'm up on it. I think NBA fans have been calling for a second coach's challenge, because I think,
you don't know how many Nick Nurse has lost.
Yeah. I think if you win one challenge, you should be able to get a second one at the very least. Now, I think they should limit it at 2, because you don't want to slow down the game too much. The game in the clutch already takes long enough. I think they improved that with the, not allowing replays in the last 2 minutes, which, I mean, has a backside also, just in case, if something gets messed up, then, I mean, but, I think they've improved the timing of the game. I think this might slow it down a bit more, but I think it works out if you limit it at 2, which is what the NBA did.
Yeah, exactly.
Next up, are you up or under on the NBA experimenting this year with calling technical fouls on flops?
I'm up on it just because I think this is gonna be hilarious to watch. I think, like, how do you do an official? How would you define a flop anymore? Like, I guess like they have criteria. Like, it has to be an egregious thing. But there are players in this league that are very good at flopping and getting away with it. So it'll definitely be interesting. But I hope that if it's done enforced correctly, it will be a deterrent from the blatant flopping that we've been seeing over the last few years.
I mean, I think it's a good rule in theory. In practice, I don't know exactly how you enforce it, if I'm being honest. Unless, like you said, egregious flops, yeah, sure, you can enforce that. But regularly, if take a charge and you sell the call, is that flopping, right? I don't think so. I don't think it's gonna be called on those anyways. But I mean, you get in some great category basically.
Yeah, like I think like the stuff like the James Harden stuff, the Trey Young flopping. I think that's the stuff that they want to get rid of. But yeah, we'll see how that kind of goes. I think it's just gonna be pretty hilarious to see some of these players' reactions to these calls.
Yeah.
I think those are gonna be absolutely hilarious. And finally, are you up or under on the new NBA in-season tournament that the format has now been revealed? Essentially, there's going to be a prize pool of $18 million that's going to be coming into play. There will be all games except for the finals will be counting as regular season games. All the teams are going to be divided into 3 pools per conference, which has already been done by the NBA. And the final 4, the semifinals and the finals will be taking place in Las Vegas. So, and as I mentioned, teams will be separated into the groups, and the group winners will move on to the quarters and obviously to the finals. So, you're up or under on this new sort of format?
I mean, I'm up on it. Obviously, people are very skeptical of the tournament, but in fairness to the NBA, people were skeptical of the play-in tournament, and that's been a huge success for the NBA. So, I think the NBA was trying to implement kind of what soccer's been doing for forever, right? Having multiple things at the same time. The question was always for the NBA with the regular season, how do you kind of integrate it? I think they did actually a pretty good job with the way maybe the finals teams will play 83 games, but everyone else will still be playing in that 82 range ballpark. So you integrate that within the regular season, and you have those games kind of count for the regular season, except for the finals. And then you have the tournament being done by, December. So I think that works out for teams. I don't think the teams have to do that much different. But it provides another incentive, for teams to try to make things more exciting. I think as fans, it's an experiment, right? It's like, if it doesn't work, the NBA can always take it out. But I think this is a good thing for the fans.
The idea is that it will be making more games matter in the regular season, which I think will increase the level of competition within the regular season and hopefully increase the on-court product during the regular season as well. So that's the goal for the NBA. So hopefully it works out. I mean, again, the play-in tournament, I'm still not 100% sold on it, but I think it has grown, and I think it has brought a new level of excitement to the game that we haven't had before.
Shout out Patrick Beverly, man. He single-handedly created the play-in tournament, all the hype around it, man.
Yo, I still think the NBA rigged it to have Golden State and the Lakers play in that play-in game for like that first year.
Yeah.
I definitely think it's rigged, but either way, I think it does add a new element of excitement to the game. But we'll see how this new in-season tournament does as well. But with that concludes this week's episode. We hope you guys enjoyed it. Definitely subscribe to the show on all the various platforms. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, and of course on YouTube. Definitely subscribe so you don't miss more great episodes from us in the future. Obviously, we will be getting into more off-season related content now as the off-season kind of goes along. So definitely stay tuned for that. And yeah, man, follow us on social media, Twitter and Instagram at @up_podcast, Facebook.com/up_podcast for all the latest updates whenever we post a new episode. Or even whenever we post some clips about certain breaking news or certain topics that we want to cover that don't really fit into some of these episodes. Definitely follow and subscribe to those channels so that you don't miss out on those. Also, check out our website, upandunderpodcast.com. It's our central hub for the show. It's a place where we write blog posts with every single episode. So if you don't have time to listen or watch the full thing, you can read about it on our website. Every episode is posted with the written version, the audio, and the video all in the same place. So definitely check that out if you haven't done so. And yeah, man. We are getting into the dog days of the summer. Usually a pretty dry period, man. It sucks that there's no sports on, man. It really, really sucks.
I mean, baseball's on.
But the Jays suck.
There's that.
But the Blue Jays suck.
Yeah, they're not doing amazing. But, I mean, it is what it is. It's the dog days of the league.
Yeah. So we'll see what happens. Hopefully we get some exciting news and hopefully we get a big trade, but we can only hope. With that, that concludes the week's episode. We'll see you guys on the next one. Take it easy.
Easy.